Hi, it's Dia Arias, and I'm here to talk about, sorry. I'm here to talk about the Judy Arias case. I have my PowerPoint up next to me, so you can follow along. I'll be letting you know when I switch pages and what I'm really talking about. But I found this case super interesting because she has my last name, so that's probably why you picked it. But Judy Arias, murder or domestic violence victim. So, who is Judy Arias? She was a saleswoman who was from Arizona. She's a conspiring, photographer. Oop, sorry, conspiring photographer, photographer. Sorry. And she grew up in a financially stable home with siblings. There was some level of abuse at home, physical abuse that she explained in her trial, where her father would beat her with a belt, her mom would carry around a wooden spoon to beat her with. So there was that at home. Then comes along who's Travis Alexander. He was a motivational speaker in Las Vegas, California. He's a Mormon, and he grew up in a low-income home, so he wasn't a stranger to poverty or low income or struggling. And he was raised by his grandparents because his parents were addicted to drugs. How was their relationship? So, to everybody in the outside world, their relationship was great. They were holding hands, they were going on trips, they were taking photos, they were, generally very happy with each other. To the public eye on social media, they had their pictures up. They seem like a perfect Mormon couple. However, there's much more than that meets the eye. Mormons aren't supposed to have premarital sex, and they were having lots and lots of sex. So they met through a mutual friend in Las Vegas. They started a long distance relationship because she's obviously from Arizona and he's from California. But then she moved to California and became a Mormon too. Right? So this is where I'm starting to get the vibe of, domestic violence. I'm getting the ideas. Seems very normal. Maybe you're just moving in with your spouse or your boyfriend. But, this is a big jump. Arizona, Las Vegas. And then the fact that she also became a Mormon, this is where I started to question, is he isolating her from everyone else in her family? Did he pressure her to come? Because what bothered me about this was that they seemed happy, but their friends weren't approving of what they were doing and their relationship. Like, they were telling him, hey, you should really break up with her, et cetera, et cetera. She's weird. She's stalking you. Which is where, I started to sit here and think, like, his friends are thinking this, but this girl just moved from Arizona, her place of home, doing her work, doing her thing, to come become a Mormon. So she's already made this huge life change. So I was thinking, like, is this possibility that he's isolating her to be able to better manipulate her, in a domestic violence case? But as it continued going on, they ended up breaking up because she saw some flirty messages between him and a bunch of other people, he was talking to, but they still became friends with benefits, if you will, meaning they were still having sexual relationships, but there wasn't a title of a relationship on what they were doing, which you can see can be very toxic, behavior, especially since he already had a different girlfriend at the time of his death. So he had a different girlfriend, but he was still having sex with Judy Arias. Do we understand the complications here? But they seemed happy. So regardless of what was going on, they stayed as friends. But they seemed like okay to the open eye. Going on next. So the incident. So they had already broken up for, quite a while, but they were having sexual relations. So they were still seeing each other when this happened. And as you can see, my PowerPoint is really, it has facts and less of a story. That's because the story of what she told is the only story we have. So I'm not doubting her. Maybe, there is a way, and maybe she was really horribly, treated by him and abused, but none of it can be proven, which sucks. in this case because, there's a very good possibility that he was, a domestic abuser, or that she was the domestic abuser. Because if you look at it, like, his friends were like, oh, she's stalking him. And later on, her cellmate was released, and she said that Judy confessed to killing him, to being in his bushes and spying on him. And his friends testified to, her sneaking into his house and spying on him and seeing what he was doing. So, there's a possibility that maybe she was the domestic abuser because, this is what it seemed like to his friends. But of course, his friends are going to take his side and not see really what's going on underneath. But as for the incident, he was killed and left in his bathroom floor. 29 stabbing wounds. So he had cuts, he had a huge cut. He had like a slice on his neck from ear to ear, which I think is a little crazy, and a gunshot above his eyebrow, and there was blood everywhere, and she was gone. Like, she pretended she wasn't there, like, not even in the vicinity. So as we're sitting here and we're analyzing this case, here's this dead man that was found by his friends because his friends got curious and started looking for him in his house. Sorry, I also have notes. In his house, right? And he's just found here dead. So my whole question was, why the shot? Why, the slice across his neck? Because it's been fictionalized in my head that when you slice someone on their neck, like, they just die. They die of, like, blood loss. I'm pretty sure that's what I've seen on TV. Like, that's what I've heard. So I'm sitting here like, why does he still have all of these stabbing wounds, cutting wounds? The shot above his eyebrow should have been enough to kill him. I don't understand why there's more there. That's why I feel like there's more to the story that we don't know. And it looks like defensive wounds, like, and possibly, like, there could be two narratives to the story. Maybe she was defending herself, and that's why he has all these random cuts and wounds, because she was fighting for her life. Or he was fighting for his life because she was trying to kill him and he was trying to get away from her. So, unfortunately, we don't know what the actual story is because all we hear is what she's telling us. So then let's talk about the trials and the courts. Obviously, that starts with the police department. They obviously, took all the evidence in. Oh, sorry, that was my computer. They took all the evidence in and, obviously, organized it, filed it, tested for prints, and took all of the criminal evidence that there was at the crime scene. They did arrest her in their thing, but she posted bail, so that happened. Then talking about the courts and the trial. So they went to criminal court, obviously, because she's being accused of first-degree murder. But what first started off, I think is really important for me to say, is she changed her story 3 times. So she originally started off saying she was never there, she wasn't in town, she hadn't been in town for a while when the police first questioned her. Then the second story, I think she tried to get a different angle. While she was being while she was being interrogated, she sat there, she did like yoga, a handstand, while she was conspiring this new story in her head. And the next story was she was there, so she completely contradicted what she had just said. There was 2 burglars that came and killed him. They threatened to kill her, but she was able to get away. See, in my head, I'm sitting here like, if this had happened, like, why didn't you seek medical attention? Because they probably hurt you. They're burglars. Just saying. Why didn't you go straight to the cops right after? Like, these are all things that were boiling in my head when she came up with this story. And then the third story that she brought up when the trials finally started happening, she said she did it, but it was self-defense. As you can see, this already sets a tone for the fact that she's lied a few times. She's changed her story, but what this started, boiling in my head was, what if she can't remember it because of the trauma? I know a lot of domestic violence victims are struggling to be able to perfectly remember what happened to them because of the trauma being so big. So I was like, maybe, she's sitting here, I'm giving her the benefit of the doubt, like, maybe she didn't murder him and this is all what she's trying to do to you know, like save herself, and it just ended up being self-defense. So I'm sitting here and I'm thinking about this, and I'm like, I know that a lot of domestic violence people that are abused can't fully recall everything that they, went through, and sometimes it takes time to unpack their memories and be able to, have the courage to unpack their memories. So I wasn't fully, blaming her at the moment, but it was starting to compile in my head, like maybe she was, somebody that was extremely battered, and, he had all this control on her, and when they broke up, it's like this person that's sitting here controlling you all of a sudden just left you. So obviously that can bring up a lot of different emotions. Then obviously the prosecution didn't believe her because they had already seen that she lied 3 times. Maybe not lied, but she had changed her story 3 times, which meant that whatever she was going to say couldn't be credible in any way. And that's what the prosecution continued to attack her for throughout the whole trial. They also convinced the jury that she was guilty, which was not great on her part. But they brought in a psychologist, Richard Samuels, who diagnosed her with PTSD and amnesia, which is what I was originally thinking, right, when I was listening to all of her stories. And he, was able to prove that when you have great trauma, your brain almost locks it away because you don't want to remember it. And obviously that was defuted by the prosecution because they said that whatever she told the psychologist was all lies. So he's just, and I quote, drinking her Kool-Aid, which is not, is a possibility. Like maybe she is this huge master manipulator that the prosecution is posting her to be. But if that is so, then she could have lied and done all of these things so that the psychologist could diagnose her with this mental illness, which is very serious, by the way. And the fact that the prosecution even, had the audacity to sit here and be like, oh, you're lying about everything that you're going through, I feel like that's a little messed up because you aren't able to fully recollect what someone's going through. And then the domestic violence expert came in also confirming that, she had suffered from domestic violence, that this was a case where she should be getting, help and being able to work through her mental trauma. Also refuted by the prosecution because of the fact that she couldn't keep her story straight and everything she had already said had been quote-unquote a lie. And her father even said that she had a history of lying. So that's what happened during the trial. What ended up happening was the jury named her guilty for first-degree murder. She was sentenced to life in prison without any possibility of parole. But this leaves the question still. Is she a domestic violence victim or a murderer? Personally, if you ask me, I think she's both. I think in the name of the law, she did murder him. That's clear. But do I think she's a domestic violence victim? I think to some degree, yes, because she had a bunch of, toxic relationships in the past that where she had experienced domestic violence. She was already exposed to it, and she was attracted to these men that had these, domestic violence tendencies already because she had already, dated all of these different people that had done this, who had already put her through, and like this is what she was attracted to. And I'm not saying that it's wrong, but like there shows a history of her dating, people who have had history of domestic violence. So while I was sitting there and I was looking at it, I think she did suffer domestic violence. I think all of the domestic violence that she had suffered from her home and her parents being, physically abusive to her bad boyfriends, it all piled up together and reacted, and she was able to really be scared for her life in that moment and act the way that she acted. So at the end of the day, I think she is a domestic violence victim, but I also believe she's a murderer. I feel like even though it was self-defense, she still killed someone, and that's still not something that's good. Yeah. At the end of the day, I feel like this case was really, I really enjoyed learning about it. I honestly didn't know about her at all. I hadn't even heard about any of it, but I think that I hope she's getting help because her cellmate came out and sat there and talked about how she is crazy, she uses people, she was still trying to stalk other people and be manipulative throughout this whole thing. So I'm hoping that you know, maybe she's getting some help in prison, but I do think that life in prison is a accurate sentence. I mean, she stabbed or sliced him 27 times in different places. You know, if this was really about self-defense, she would have done something to stop him and then ran. I feel like it was a little extra, definitely a crime of passion. Yeah, I don't know, that's it.